As more than 90 Islamic State terrorists stationed at a Libyan training camp some 30 miles off the coastal city of Sirte were doing their business as usual, the sky looked clear. Or so they thought. The militants did not know it yet, but an American spy plane was watching from above. As they left the concealment of their barracks and moved to an open space carrying their rifles, mortars, and other weaponry, they realized something was wrong. A dozen explosives soon hit the base, but it was too late to react. The ISIS camp was being attacked by America's most lethal aircraft, the B-2 stealth bomber, and only 3 of them were enough to create complete mayhem. Operation Odyssey Dawn was the U.S. codename for the American military intervention in Libya to enforce the United Nations Security Council resolution of 1973. One of the operation's main objectives was to establish a no-fly zone over the skies of Libya to prevent government forces from aiding dictator Muammar Gaddafi with airstrikes against Libyan revolutionaries who opposed the regime. By then, Libya was burning. A civil war had divided the population between those that supported Gaddafi and those who didn't, and the anti-Gaddafi forces were supported by NATO members, the National Liberation Army, the National Transitional Council, and the Islamic Fighting Group. After a quick summit in Paris, French, American, and British aircraft began launching airstrikes over Benghazi. They were also supported by warships and submarines that sent devastating Tomahawk cruise missiles to destroy army garrisons fighting for Gaddafi. After almost a month of brutal bombing campaigns, the U.S. passed the military air command to NATO, leading to Operation Unified Protector. Gaddafi was then caught by NTC militants on October 20th, 2011, at Sirte, his hometown. After 4 decades of dictatorship, he was finally gone, but it came at a high cost. Libya was in ashes, and the population was still divided into factions, hungry for power. Still, the Libyans started rebuilding their country, but the tensions quickly escalated. By 2014, the Islamic State, or ISIS, began to expand its self-proclaimed caliphate beyond Syria and Iraq. Soon, Libyan militants proclaimed their allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and in 2015, these radicals took over Sirte and declared it part of the ISIS caliphate. The US was watching closely and took it upon themselves to solve the situation before Libya became another ISIS-controlled nation. After taking over Sirte, the ISIS militants launched attacks on the rest of Libya. Meanwhile, the government of National Accord arrived at the city to retake it with the support of some 6,000 mercenaries. The U.S. Africa Command, based in Germany, oversaw the violent house-to-house combat operations unfold, and they had special forces operators, drones, aircraft, and other means to help the Libyans. By mid-July 2016, the Africa Command had carried out over 500 strikes on ISIS targets, with drones, Marine Corps Harrier jets, and helicopters. The more than 2,000 ISIS fighters were eventually decimated, but many survived the American airstrikes. The Air Force referred to them as squirters because they squirted out from their pressure of strikes and disappeared into the cities. Meanwhile, a group of about 100 militants ventured into the desert and established 2 camps about 30 miles southwest of Sirte to regroup and counterattack. Unfortunately, they made themselves open targets for the American strikes, as they were alone in the desert without any civilians. Consequently, President Barack Obama decided to get rid of this enemy once and for all, and did it in the most expensive way possible, by employing B-2 stealth bombers. Preparations for President Obama's bombing mission were carried out with extreme secrecy, and B-2 crews at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and tankers from the Air Mobility Command were put on high alert. They had over 96 hours to coordinate a strike plan in Libya to eliminate the 2 isolated ISIS camps. Personnel from the base barely knew what was happening, but over 100 people were put in 12-hour shifts to assemble over 3,500 pieces worth and 78,000 pounds of explosives. The crews knew this was not a simple training run when they began loading the bomb load into the first B-2, and 2 more were getting ready. It was the first time since the 2011 Libya bombings that the B-2s would be taken out of their facility for an operation. Only 21 have ever been built by the US, and at $2.1 billion each, the air crews ensured the 3 bombers were ready for battle. The Air Mobility Command planned an air bridge of KC-10 extenders and KC-135 Stratotankers extending from New Jersey and Europe to get the 3 B-2 bombers to their target. Then, on the night of January 18th, the 3 B-2s took off for Libya, ready for a 30-hour-long journey. The 2-man crew in each aircraft was trained to perform any flight role, but it was still a relief that the B-2s had a small place behind the cockpit where they could stretch. They also had a toilet, some styrofoam coolers to store food, and a microwave. The first refuel happened above Maine, where a KC-135 Stratotanker attended the 3 B-2s. By the time the stealth bombers reached the Mediterranean, the pilots began programming the bombs that had not been readied before. Almost a quarter of the bombs were already coded to explode upon impact with any structure or vehicle, but the rest were now being programmed with the latest geographic coordinate of ISIS fighters near Sirte. Then came the second refueling, with tankers that flew from Germany. The 3 bombers then turned south and disappeared from air traffic control radar, about 250 miles north of the Libyan coastline. 15 hours into the flight, the bombers heard how Mission Control ordered the MQ-9 Reapers, armed with Hellfire missiles, to perform a second pass to finish off any ISIS survivor once the B-2 bombers had dropped their payload. When close to the target area, the B-2 pilots began approaching the enemy camps from an altitude of 35,000 feet at 480 miles per hour. Once there, the 3 aircraft opened their bomb bay doors and unleashed hell from above. The first B-2 dropped 62 out of the 80 bombs, while another released 23. Over 75 bombs were kept, in case another pass was needed. Down below, orange blows followed by clouds of sand could be seen as the bombs hit the targets. There was no way out for the ISIS militants. Each bomb detonated just above the objective to maximize damage, and those who survived were immediately followed by Reaper drones looking for squirters. The Hellfire missiles began to pick off every militant that tried to run away from the destroyed zone with pinpoint accuracy, and none survived the attack. It was all over in less than 5 minutes. Shortly afterward, the B-2s were cleared to head back home, and after more refuels and 33 hours in the air, they finally landed in Missouri. The mission had been a success. After the success of the classified operation, United States officials told the press on January 19, 2017, that 3 U.S. Air Force B-2 stealth bombers had struck 2 Islamic State camps some 28 miles south of Sirte on Wednesday night. Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook said in a statement, quote, "In conjunction with the Libyan government of national accord, the U.S. military conducted precision airstrikes Wednesday night, destroying 2 ISIS camps 45 kilometers southwest of Sirte." When asked about the justification of such an attack, Defense Secretary Ash Carter said that these dangerous fighters were, quote, "actively plotting operations in Europe." Other reporters questioned the Defense Secretary about using one of the most expensive bombers ever fielded by the United States Air Force to destroy an enemy that could be eliminated by less costly means. Carter explained that the S-2 stealth bombers were, quote, "the most capable tools for this mission, even though other available air power was closer to North Africa." The questions had some historical significance. During the past decade, the United States Air Force had been conducting airstrikes over Libya and the surroundings, with several American aircraft and drones coming directly from a base in England. And if that was not close enough, the U.S. Navy also had 2 guided missile destroyers armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles off the coast of Libya for immediate action. Despite this adamant and somewhat lacking argument, other intelligence sources claimed that the U.S. acted this way to send a strategic message to adversaries such as China and Russia. Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook ended his statement by saying, quote, "The United States remains prepared to further support Libyan efforts to counter terrorist threats and to defeat ISIL in Libya. We are committed to maintaining pressure on ISIL and preventing them from establishing a safe haven." For the time being, the United States Air Force and its partners are working on the B-2 stealth bomber's successor, the B-21 Raider. There is little information about it, but Northrop Grumman has stated that it will be superior to its predecessor in every conceivable way. As the world emerged from the brutal onslaught of World War II, it began its steep descent into the dreadful pits of the Cold War. Across each side of the Iron Curtain, military factions raced to produce the ultimate strategic bomber, a massive long-range aircraft capable of piercing all enemy defenses to deliver immense amounts of unspeakable nuclear devastation right into the hearts of their opponents' largest cities and population centers. With the Convair B-58 Hustler becoming the first operational Mach 2 capable strategic bomber, the US appeared to have won the upper hand. Nevertheless, the Soviets were devising their unique response, an aircraft so massive and fast that it could eradicate New York City before being detected. With a ghastly flying wing configuration and powered by 6 turbojet VK-15M engines, the DBS-LK Dark Star strategic bomber was designed to pierce into the United States at speeds above Mach 2.8, outclassing every American interceptor in active service. The Dark Star's ominous design seemed to come straight out of a sci-fi movie. It also presented the United States and its allies with a very real threat, that of nuclear annihilation. During the 1950s and 60s, the military aviation industry was focused on producing faster aircraft. Most air defense systems were based on radar detection, followed by the launch of interceptor aircraft capable of catching the enemies and taking them out of the sky before they could deal any damage. Emerging strategic bomber designs sought to eliminate the enemy's capacity to defend itself by being so fast that by the time the radars detected it and sent an interceptor, the aircraft would already be gone. As the Soviet Union and the US did everything in their power to manufacture the fastest supersonic bombers, they had to simultaneously build increasingly faster interceptors that could catch the enemy's supersonic strategic bombers in case of an attack. Speed was the name of the game. It was both the mechanism through which bombers were meant to surpass enemy defenses and also the means to defend a nation against that very threat. Developed during the 1950s for the United States Air Force, the futuristic Convair B-58 Hustler seemed to achieve a decisive victory. The aircraft was the first operational nuclear-capable bomber to reach speeds above Mach 2, giving it the ability to outrun the fastest Soviet interceptor at the time, the MiG-21. But just as the Hustler performed its maiden flight in 1960, the Soviets had begun early research on an utterly earth-shattering project, a massive strategic bomber that would be able to reach speeds surpassing Mach 4. Such a feat of engineering would immediately give the Soviet Union total supremacy in the skies. In 1957, the Leningrad Red Banner Air Force Engineering Academy began designing what they envisioned as the strategic bomber of the future. The orders came directly from the Air Force General Staff, and the program was led by renowned aeronautical engineer Alexander Sergeyevich Moskalyov. The project was named Dalny Strategiczny Bombarderowczyk Latający Krilo, or DSBLK, which translates to Long Range Strategic Bomber Flying Wing. The engineering team theorized a series of aeronautical configurations that would allow a massive strategic bomber to deliver over 40 tons of nuclear payloads at speeds ranging from Mach 2 to 4. Flight models projected that a propulsion system powered by 6, 8, or 10 turbojet engines could provide flying speeds of up to Mach 2 to 3.8. Even so, Moskalyov considered the possibility of using a mixed configuration of ramjet engines that could theoretically push the strategic bomber at speeds over Mach 4. With additional experimentation, speeds of up to Mach 5 could be attained, and Moskalyov did not rule out the possibility of designing the first hypersonic strategic bomber on Earth. The layout was ages ahead of its time, and the early design occurred in parallel to the American Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, which would eventually achieve Mach 3 speeds. To meet such ambitious expectations, the team led by Moskalyov developed several specific layout diagrams for the aircraft's fuselage, ranging from conventional, tailless, flying wing, and duck wing configurations, as well as swept, sickle-shaped wings, and triangular, rectangular, and trapezoidal wing designs. Each proposal was more futuristic and unique than the last. In the end, they decided to go with a flying wing configuration, in which most of the fuselage would be part of the wing structure, reducing drag significantly and further increasing the speed projections of the aircraft. The airframe design was as long as a football field from nose to tail, and with a 121-foot wingspan that would have made it the largest flying wing on Earth, and the most massive bomber to take to the skies. The ultimate strategic bomber would not only need to be uniquely fast, but it would also need to be able to reach every corner of the world from its bases in the Soviet Union. To achieve the maximum speed and range possible, the Dark Star was devised to fly at incredibly high altitudes of up to 100,000 feet, with much lower air resistance. Soaring at such formidable heights, Moskalyov projected that the DSB-LK would be able to reach targets at 10,000 miles, putting the entire world within its range from different bases across the nation. For it to work, it had to be constructed of uniquely durable and light material. As such, titanium was chosen as the primary material for the aircraft, instead of the conventional D-23 alloy used in many Soviet airframes at the time. The uncommon material, often used for spacecraft designs, was hard to find for most nations during the 1950s. Still, the USSR had the most extensive available stockpiles, which would have made the manufacturing process possible even in large numbers. Even when technically heavier than aluminum, only a fraction of titanium is needed to achieve the same strength that aluminum can provide, making it the ideal material designed to cruise 10,000 miles in a single flight. With the fuselage design, speed, range, and altitude accounted for, Moskalyov then moved to the weapons capabilities of the formidable strategic bomber. The Dark Star was designed to have a vast offensive and defensive arsenal at its disposal. To diminish the United States' ability to wage war, the bomber could hold a 20-ton payload inside its bomb bay. Considering that the largest flying wing in the world, the B-2 Spirit, has a maximum 18-ton payload capacity, the Dark Star's 20-ton bomb bay was a remarkable design feat. Additionally, the Dark Star was equipped with several hardpoints under the wing structure, which allowed it to carry up to 20 additional tons of warheads. With such an impressive capacity, the Dark Star could hypothetically carry nuclear warheads as massive as the Tsar Bomba, the most powerful thermonuclear weapon ever developed and tested. Considering it could reach Mach 5 and carry thermonuclear warheads of up to 20 tons, the Dark Star could have turned the entirety of New York City into dust without ever being detected by U.S. defensive systems. As improbable as intercepting a Mach 5 bomber was in the 1960s, even if a U.S. fighter managed to engage the Soviet strategic bomber, it was in for a fight. The Dark Star was to be equipped with 4 remote-controlled turrets that could fire over 7,000 to 9,000 rounds per minute in every direction. The bomber design could also carry 4 to 5 guided air-to-air projectiles to engage approaching enemy aircraft from a considerably safe distance. To further avoid detection, the bomber was to be fitted with a series of jamming stations for enemy radar systems. Combined with its remarkable speeds, it would render enemy radar operators ineffective at identifying and tracking the Soviet aircraft. In addition to strike operations, the DSB-LK was equipped with radio and photographic reconnaissance systems to conduct high-altitude surveillance behind enemy territory. Ultimately, the Dark Star was meant to be an extremely survivable aircraft, with enough firepower to eradicate entire cities. Despite its potential to become the fastest and most powerful strategic bomber on Earth, The Dark Star never went beyond the early design phase. Many historians argue that the USSR did not have the capabilities to build such a wonder weapon, assuring that the project was more of a theoretical layout than a feasible design. The Soviet Union's military was indeed facing severe challenges at the start of the 1960s. However, the demise of the Dark Star project can also be explained by outside influence. The recent strides in intercontinental ballistic missile technology rendered many of the supersonic and hypersonic bomber projects useless on both sides of the Iron Curtain, as the missiles could do the same job at a fraction of the cost. In addition, the development of supersonic surface-to-air missile systems also made the use of supersonic bombers highly risky, and aircraft engineers were soon looking for stealth instead of speed, as a way to circumvent the defenses a strategic bomber might face. The Dark Star was way ahead of its time, but also a decade too late to have had a chance at being built. If all conditions had been met, perhaps the Soviets would have reigned supreme in the strategic bomber race. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress not only brought one of the world's largest and most brutal conflicts to a shocking end by delivering the atomic bombs on top of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but it also revolutionized combat aviation technology as a whole. With a staggering wingspan of 141 feet and a total 99-foot length from nose to tail, this colossal aircraft was the heaviest bomber in the world when it flew for the first time in 1942. Moreover, it had two enormous bomb bays that could carry the most massive payloads of any warplane. The Superfortress was engineered as one of the first warplanes with a pressurized cabin, and it was able to fly so high that no Japanese aircraft could reach it. The project was the most expensive and ambitious undertaking by the US military of its time, costing even more than the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. Still, as the US appeared to have reached supremacy over the skies, the most advanced bomber in the world was stolen by its wartime ally, sending America into a desperate pursuit to get it back. In 1938, Europe was struggling to appease an ever more defiant Hitler in the West. And in the Far East, Imperial Japan was aggressively expanding over Chinese territory in a bold move to establish itself as the leading Asian superpower. American military strategists knew a significant conflict was brewing and needed to plan for a possible involvement. When it came to air bombardment capabilities, they felt the US could do an adequate job over European territory, but if a war against Japan broke out, their recently developed B-17 Flying Fortress bomber did not have the range nor the ideal altitude to pose a threat. The most significant issue the US faced when considering war in the Pacific was range, and its bombers would not be capable of sustaining the vast distances between one island to another, especially Japan's main island. An aircraft with increased range was required, but the task was not as simple as equipping a new bomber with a more powerful engine. The answer lay in altitude. If a bomber could fly at a higher altitude with less air density and resistance, the fuel would last longer. Boeing soon began experimenting with pressurized long-range bomber designs in an attempt to reach higher altitudes. However, pressurized cabins were a novel concept at the time. The Air Corps didn't have the funds to finance much experimentation, but Boeing's executives were so determined and confident in the technology's military prospects that the company funded the venture. A prototype called Model 334 was then born, which was a pressurized derivative of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. Then, in April of 1939, reports surfaced of Germany's mass production of bombers, and legendary pilot Charles Lindbergh convinced General Henry H. Arnold to produce a new bomber in large numbers so that America could be ready to face the Germans. By December, the Air Corps formally issued a specification for a so-called super bomber that could deliver 20,000 pounds of bombs to a target 2,667 miles away at a speed of 400 miles per hour. As the request reached all major aircraft manufacturers in America, Boeing had a significant advantage, as their Model 334 met many of the requirements. Boeing's proposal was officially submitted in May of 1940. After being accepted, it was codenamed XB-29, and the Air Corps tasked the aircraft manufacturer with producing 3 prototypes. The development of what would become the B-29 Superfortress was complex and logistically problematic. Many of the obstacles stem from the pressurized cabin imperative, which forced Boeing to go with a circular cross-section and stepless cockpit design. Both features were chosen to facilitate even distribution of pressure within the cabin, and they immediately gave the aircraft a distinct look. By now, the world was at war, and there was tremendous pressure on Boeing to deliver its new generation of bombers. However, Boeing had to employ 5 different factories to manufacture the various sections of the aircraft. Thousands of subcontractors also worked on the project, but a series of setbacks delayed the final production. Still, the Air Corps placed an order for 500 B-29 Superfortresses in 1942. Several tests took place with the second prototype the following year, but the hasty production cycle led to tragic shortcomings. On February 18th, an aircraft taking off from Boeing Field in Seattle experienced an engine fire and crashed. Most of the issues with the B-29 had to do with the Wright R-3350 duplex cyclone radial engines, which were a relatively new technology and suffered from many stability issues. After the tragedy, Boeing engineers added cuffs on the propeller blades to divert a greater cooling airflow into the intakes. Oil flow to the valves was also increased, and asbestos baffles were installed around rubber pushrod fittings to prevent oil loss. In addition, thorough pre-flight inspections were instituted to detect unseated valves, and mechanics frequently replaced the engine cylinders. In fact, the entire engine would be replaced every 75 hours of flight time. Many subsequent modifications were conducted after the aircraft were already built. In 1943, many modified B-29 bombers became available to the U.S. military for the first time. The aircraft was still considered an immature bomber, prone to failures and sudden fires, but the pressure to deliver the new super bomber to the battlefront was too big. Despite its shortcomings, the Superfortress was the most technologically advanced bomber of World War II, with several distinctive features, such as guns that could be fired by remote control. Also, it had 2 pressurized crew areas, connected by a long tube over the bomb bays, and a separate pressurized area for the gunner. The B-29 was actually the first pressurized American aviation bomber and the world's heaviest production plane due to its fuel load and bomb bay capacity requirements. The pressurized cabin allowed the aircraft to reach altitudes of up to 31,850 feet at a speed of over 350 miles per hour. For many of the Axis warplanes, especially the Japanese, reaching the same altitude as a Superfortress was impossible, rendering the American bomber practically immune to enemy interception. The B-29 was initially intended to be used against Germany first, and then it would be used in the Pacific. However, due to the constant delays, the U.S. military continued to use the B-17 for the Western campaign. When the B-29 was finally deployed, it was based in the Chinese region of Chengdu to fulfill a promise that the U.S. had made to China of attacking Japan from their territory. The B-29 would conduct most of its sorties from Chinese forward bases, first attacking Japanese assets within China and Manchuria, and then venturing into the Japanese islands. The B-29 was used in thousands of raids against Japan, and the constant bombing brought Japan to its knees. On July 31, 1944, the B-29 Ramp Tramp of the United States Army Air Force 462nd Very Heavy Bomb Group experienced an engine failure after a bombing run to Manchuria that included over 100 combat planes. The bomber was urgently diverted to Vladivostok, Russia, for an emergency landing. After landing safely, the crew were taken off the premises and were not allowed back to the aircraft. In a politically defiant move, the Soviet Union enforced a particular clause from the Pacific War Pact that specified that they had no obligation to return foreign assets from a military force fighting in the Pacific conflict. The scheme had a much more cynical purpose. For decades, Soviet development of modern 4-engine heavy bombers had lagged significantly compared to Western powers. The Soviet Petlyakov PE-8 had been the most used bomber by the Red Army, but it paled in comparison to the novel B-29. Joseph Stalin asked President Franklin D. Roosevelt several times to supply the Soviet Union with B-29s under the U.S. military aid program. The U.S. did give the Soviets over $11 billion in war materials, but it would never give them a groundbreaking weapon that could be used against the Americans at some point. As an opportunity arose to catch up with the U.S., Stalin didn't hesitate to steal the state-of-the-art aircraft to study its technology and reverse engineer it. Along with the Ramp Tramp, a few other B-29s were forced to land in Russia, and all of them were seized and taken into a secret compound in Moscow, where the Tupolev aircraft manufacturer was tasked with replicating the superfortress to the last bolt. After 2 years, Tupolev managed to create its own version of the superfortress, named Tu-4, but it lacked the precise materials the US had used on the original one. The two most iconic B-29 units were the Enola Gay and the Boxcar. Those two bombers were chosen as part of the Silver Plate series, the particular unit tasked with delivering the atomic bombs to Japanese cities. These Silver Plate bombers were heavily modified for the unique task, and were fitted with fuel injection systems and reversible props. In addition, they were stripped of all guns except those on the tail to make them lighter. Pilot Charles Sweeney would later credit the reversible props for saving Boxcar after making an emergency landing in Okinawa after the Nagasaki bombing. The modifications made the two B-29s the most capable bomber planes in the world, and the only aircraft capable of accomplishing such a dangerous and extended mission. Enola Gay dropped the first bomb, Little Boy, on top of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Boxcar delivered the second bomb, Fat Man, on top of Nagasaki 3 days later. The events not only cemented the B-29s as the aircraft that delivered the most damage to Japan, but also as the one that finally put an end to the war in the Pacific. The early 1930s witnessed an unprecedented surge in aviation innovation. In this era of skyward dreams, the Boeing X-B-15 bomber soared into existence. Conceived by the United States Army Air Corps, this giant became a symbol of possibility in both military and commercial aviation. The XB-15 was Boeing's answer to a challenge: create a long-range bomber like no other. With its breathtaking wingspan, powerful array of engines, and revolutionary focus on crew comfort, this aircraft was sculpted for the heavens. Despite its monumental role in the evolution of super bombers, the XB-15's tail often remains overshadowed, its contributions to aviation history underappreciated. But more than just a feat of engineering, the XB-15 was a harbinger of change. Its influence was profound, echoing through World War II and into the development of commercial aviation. The design principles and innovations introduced by this aircraft laid the groundwork for the iconic B-17 Flying Fortress and reshaped the future of air travel. In the early 1930s, a time marked by the march of aviation progress, the roots of the Boeing XB-15 bomber found fertile ground. At the heart of this aeronautical revolution lay the United States Army Air Corps, or USAAC, driven by a fervent curiosity about the potential of long-range strategic bombing. As the doctrines of air power evolved, foreseeing that the destiny of future conflicts would hinge on aerial supremacy, the USAAC issued a clarion call for a new breed of bombers capable of traversing vast distances with immense payloads. Responding to the USAAC's call, Boeing presented a design proposal that resonated with audacity and foresight. The embryonic form of what would later emerge as the XB-15 was initially designated as the XB-LR-1 for Experimental Bomber Long Range Design 1, hinting at its pioneering role in the evolving landscape of military aviation. This blueprint marked a leap in aeronautical innovation, pushing the boundaries of contemporary aviation technology. The XB-LR-1 design boasted a colossal wingspan, multiple engines for extended range, and a commitment to crew comfort during prolonged missions. This ambitious vision evolved into the XB-15, earning its stripes as an experimental bomber through a military aircraft reclassification. The journey from concept to reality was fraught with technical tribulations, particularly in the domains of engine performance and airframe design. The XB-15, a behemoth among aircraft, stood as a testament to the tenacity of Boeing's engineering prowess. Its colossal frame and groundbreaking design catapulted the aviation world into a new era of strategic bombing capabilities. Boeing's mid-1930s bomber aesthetic manifested in circular fuselage cross-sections, expansive wings, tailwheel stance, and plexiglass-glazed blisters housing an arsenal of handheld machine guns. With a majestic wingspan stretching 149 feet, this colossal aircraft claimed its place among the world's largest at the time. Powered by 4 formidable Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines, the XB-15 soared into uncharted territory, achieving a remarkable range exceeding 5,000 miles. However, it was not just its sheer size that set the XB-15 apart. It was a harbinger of innovation. Featuring a fully pressurized and spacious fuselage, this technological marvel facilitated high-altitude flight while ensuring enhanced comfort for its crew. The pioneering pressurization technology of the XB-15 marked a turning point in aviation, paving the way for future advancements in both military and commercial aircraft. Despite its impressive capabilities, the XB-15 carried the weight, quite literally, of its own bulk. With a length of 87 feet 7 inches and an empty weight of 37,709 pounds, the bomber's silhouette bore the burden of its 35-ton gross weight. Yet, it boasted a payload capacity that could deliver a substantial amount of ordnance over vast distances. In addition to its dual-wheeled main landing gear, reminiscent of World War I bombers, the XB-15's interior wing space revealed provisions for additional bomb bays. Equipped with galley and bunk facilities, this behemoth could stay aloft for up to 24 hours, requiring relief crews. Beyond its military role, the XB-15 played a pivotal role in the evolution of commercial aviation. Wellwood Beale, a visionary engineer, drew inspiration from the bomber's massive wing design for a revolutionary airliner seaplane. His innovative adaptation, documented in dated and signed sketches, laid the groundwork for the Pan American Airways Clipper. It was penciled in a memo reading, quote, "increase span by adding 36 inches to body width." Beale's ingenious solution resulted in a spacious hull that owed its existence, in part, to the XB-15's wingspan. Preceding the renowned B-17 Flying Fortress in conception, the XB-15 was a behemoth, a 4-engine bomber designed to dominate the skies. Its genesis began before the B-17, yet it soared into the heavens more than 2 years after its heralded counterpart. On October 15, 1937, the XB-15 unfurled its colossal wings and embarked on its inaugural flight. However, despite its groundbreaking design, it faced a turbulent journey marred by engineering challenges and technological lag. The heartbeat of the XB-15 lay in its colossal wingspan, nearly half as large as the storied B-17. Yet fate had its say, and the XB-15, despite its early promise, grappled with an Achilles heel: underpowered engines. Despite the technological prowess of its engines, they faltered in delivering the speed and performance commensurate with the demands of a modern bomber. It found itself relegated to the shadows, eclipsed by the ascent of more advanced aircraft, particularly the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress. The saga of the XB-15 unfolded against the backdrop of a quest for power. It met the Air Corps stipulation for a bomber with a 5,000-mile range, but it confronted the pervasive challenge of its time: an airframe so massive that even 4 engines struggled to impart the desired vigor. Originally slated to be powered by Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engines, the XB-15 pivoted to radial Pratt & Whitney R1830s before it soared into the heavens. The Army's call for a multi-engine bomber birthed the B-17, and Boeing, in response, sought an airframe of streamlined elegance, reducing the burden on its engines and birthing a combat aircraft fit for the impending tempest. In the turbulent years leading up to World War II, the United States Air Corps found itself at a crossroads, debating the optimal role of aviation in its defense strategy. Bombardment aviation was a key contender, backed by fervent advocates within the Air Corps, while pursuit aviation, represented by nimble fighters, also had its own proponents. Amidst this strategic jockeying, transport and cargo missions languished, relegated to the sidelines due to the financial constraints of the Depression era. In that context, the XB-15 promised to redefine heavy bombardment aviation. However, as flight tests unfolded, it became evident that the XB-15 fell short of the necessary speeds required for an effective bomber. Despite this setback, the pragmatic Air Corps, mindful of budgetary constraints, refrained from consigning the colossal prototype to the scrap heap. Crafted in an era when production lines heavily relied on hand-fitting of parts, the notion of keeping a single prototype in operational service was not as daunting as it might be in our modern age. In 1938, the XB-15 found itself assigned to the 2nd Bomb Group at Langley Field, Virginia. During exercises with ground army units, this lumbering giant showcased its endurance and impressive load-carrying capabilities. The true test for the XB-15 came in 1939, when a devastating earthquake struck Chile. On February 4th, the XB-15, laden with 3,250 pounds of crucial medical supplies from the Red Cross, took flight from Virginia. This mission demonstrated the aircraft's remarkable range and load capabilities, and earned its crew the prestigious Mackay Trophy for executing the most significant flight of the year. Major Caleb V. Haynes, a commanding figure by all accounts, piloted the XB-15 through these headline-grabbing feats. On July 30th, 1939, alongside co-pilot Captain William D. Old, Haynes embarked on a record-setting quest from Patterson Field, Ohio. With a staggering payload of 15.5 tons, the XB-15 soared to an altitude of 2,000 meters, surpassing a previous payload record set by a Soviet pilot 3 years earlier by more than a ton. Just 3 days later, Haynes and the XB-15 were once again etching their names into aviation history. This time, they set a new record over a closed course, carrying 4,409 pounds at an average speed exceeding 166 miles per hour over a distance of 5,000 kilometers, or 3,107 miles. In a strategic shift, the United States Army Air Forces recognized the untapped potential of the XB-15 and redefined its purpose to meet the pressing demands of non-combat operations. Stripping away its militaristic arsenal, the XB-15 underwent a metamorphosis at the San Antonio Air Depot. The bomb bay and associated weaponry were eliminated, making room for a new mission: transport. The interior underwent a radical reconfiguration, emphasizing cargo and troop-carrying capabilities. This transformation marked a shift from a weapon of war to a crucial support asset, adapted to serve the logistical needs of a global conflict. As the specter of war loomed large, the XB-15, now rechristened the XC-105, took to the skies in its revised role. Operating out of Albrook Field in Panama, it shuttled freight and passengers across vast distances, from Miami to the Galapagos Islands. In the crucible of the Pacific Theater, where the expanses of the ocean demanded unparalleled range, the XC-105 emerged as a stalwart logistical workhorse. While not adorned with the glitz and glamour of frontline combat, the XC-105 played an indispensable role in the Allied triumph. Its long-range capabilities facilitated the ferrying of vital supplies and personnel, contributing significantly to the war effort. Laden with payloads of up to 15 tons, the XC-105 silently etched its mark on the logistical canvas of World War II. Despite its limited role in combat, the Boeing XB-15 stands as a testament to innovation and progress. Though the XB-15 itself never entered mass production or experienced extensive combat, its impact on aviation was profound. It became a testing ground for concepts crucial to the success of subsequent long-range bombers, notably the iconic Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and the renowned B-29 Superfortress. Beyond the realm of warfare, the XB-15's innovations extended into the commercial sphere. Its pioneering development of pressurized cabins left an indelible mark on the airline industry, paving the way for more comfortable and higher-flying passenger aircraft. While only a single prototype of the XB-15 was ever constructed, its impact resonated through Boeing's design ethos. The aircraft manufacturer harnessed the lessons learned from the XB-15 to mold the B-17 and the Model 314 Clipper. As the 1940s dawned, the XB-15 found itself eclipsed by more advanced counterparts like the B-17 and the B-29. Its combat role waned, but its influence endured. The legacy of the XB-15 reverberated in the design principles of its successor, the B-29 Superfortress, a key player in World War II. The waning days of the XB-15 saw it transform into the XC-105, affectionately nicknamed Grandpappy. This aging giant found a new role as a cargo plane, tallying impressive numbers in freight, mail, and passengers during its 18 months of service in the Caribbean. Yet, as the winds of progress swept through aviation, Grandpappy succumbed to obsolescence. By December 1944, Grandpappy's military service drew to a close, and in May 1945, the order came to scrap this aging marvel in Panama. The era of purpose-built cargo aircraft had arrived, marking the end of Grandpappy's journey. When the globe leapt into conflict in the late 1930s, governments around the world scoured for funding and materials that could be used for their nation's side of the fight. And as Germany unleashed its might and power against the Allies in Europe, top Third Reich officials enlisted an engineering marvel into their arsenal. The Junkers G-38 four-engine transport aircraft was the pride and joy of the Luftwaffe officials and worked in civilian operations for a decade. It featured a blended wing design where the body, fuselage, and wings merged with no clear dividing lines. In addition to being a novelty, this unique wing configuration allowed a few lucky passengers to get incredible scenic views from their seats on the wings. And during the earlier years of the conflict, the globally admired model participated in several bomber and transport roles, fighting for the Axis powers with all its might. During the interwar period, Junkers Aircraft and Motor Works was one of the mainstays of the German aircraft industry. Throughout the 1920s, the company's leader and aircraft engineering pioneer Hugo Junkers made several attempts to create a large-scale commercial transport. However, they had to be destroyed based on post-World War I Allied demands in the Treaty of Versailles, which prohibited Germany from developing aircraft with a certain amount of power or potential military applications. Still, Junkers persevered. Later in the decade, the German Design Bureau resumed the project as the G-40 transatlantic mail seaplane. Simultaneously, the Bureau also developed the G-38, a landplane version. After the project received financing from the Reich Air Ministry, the G-38 moved on to the construction stage. Structurally, the G-38 conformed to the standard Junkers approach and was covered in stressed, corrugated duraluminum, with the cockpit located in the streamlined bow of the fuselage. The German aircraft followed blended wing body design, in which a fixed-wing aircraft's wing and body structures are smoothly blended together with no clear dividing line. This technology was pioneered by Louis Demonge and proved to be very maneuverable and quiet, despite its awkward appearance. The most outstanding feature of the G-38 aircraft was its ability to carry both payloads and passengers on its almost 6-foot-thick wings. Junkers engineers took advantage of the massive blended wing and placed the aircraft's wing center section to accommodate a passenger cabin on each side. Besides the wings, the entire fuselage also offered a lot of space for freight and passengers, as it was easily accessible. On November 6, 1929, the four-engine G-38 aircraft had its maiden flight in Dessau, northern Germany, flying for 45 minutes. The new Junkers model was the result of many of the Bureau's efforts to build a massive passenger aircraft, limited by the Versailles Treaty time and time again. At the time of its introduction, the G-38 was the largest aircraft in the world. With its size and revolutionary static design that allowed for payload compartments in the wings, the newest Junkers model was admired by fellow engineering companies and praised for its novelty. Then, after being registered with serial number 3301 and the identifier D2000, the Reich Air Ministry purchased the first G-38 model for demonstration flights. Delivered in March of 1930, the G-38 set 4 world records during these tests, including speed, distance, and duration for airplanes lifting a massive 11,025-pound payload. After receiving worldwide acclaim, Deutsche Lufthansa AG, the flag carrier of Germany, put the model into commercial service. By July of 1930, Lufthansa's G-38 began scheduled flights between Berlin and London with a capacity for up to 13 passengers. Only a few months later, With the popularity of the Junkers model rising all over Europe, the model was taken in for upgrades, mainly to expand the passenger cabin. Construction lasted until mid-1932, when a second deck was built within the D2000 fuselage. On February 2, 1931, the Junkers yard engineers re-engined the first G38 model, upgrading it with 2 Junkers L8 and 2 L88 engines. This change gave the model a total power rating of 2,366 horsepower. In the meantime, engineers remodeled the second G38 with a double-deck fuselage and a capacity for 34 passengers. 6 of the passengers could enjoy the flight while sitting comfortably inside the wings between the power plants and the fuselage in scenic seats with floor windows. Lufthansa used the second model, renamed General Field Marshal von Hindenburg after the famous general, to cover scheduled services within many European cities, including Berlin, Hanover, Amsterdam, and London. Throughout the decade, both G38s became a source of pride for the German aircraft industry. However, the aircraft's manufacturing, maintenance, and advertisement tours came with hefty price tags. The numbers went as high as 2.2 million Reichsmarks and were covered mainly by the German state. Even Lufthansa executives spent thousands of Reichsmarks on the model, believing that the aircraft had immense appeal to the passengers. Both modified G38 models continued to serve until May of 1936, when test pilot Wilhelm Zimmermann crashed the first G38 model during a particularly windy post-maintenance test flight while gliding at low altitude. Due to extensive damage, Lufthansa had no choice but to write off the innovative and costly aircraft. General Field Marshal von Hindenburg, the second G38 that was later marked DAPIS, continued to fly with Lufthansa's fleet for nearly a decade, just as the Third Reich became more powerful. At the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the remaining Junkers G38 were put into military service as heavy transport craft by the Luftwaffe. For almost 2 years, the model performed several distinct operations in the European theater. Then, on May 17, 1941, Adolf Hitler issued his proposed guidelines for the military government of Greece after conquering Athens weeks before. Directive No. 29 was a series of instructions and strategic plans issued by the Führer himself, covering detailed regulations for the governance of occupied territories, their populations, and how the German armed forces would operate in the area. But despite their loss, the Greeks continued to be supported by the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. That same day, during an air raid performed by the Royal Air Force's Beaufighters of Squadron 252, based in Malta, English crews spotted the Luftwaffe's Junkers G38, and the second and final model was in for a grisly end, perpetrated by the Royal Air Force guns. As the Junkers G38 model performed trial flights in the late 1920s, representatives for Japanese company Mitsubishi arrived in Germany to meet with the engineers. The representatives expressed an interest in a military version of the German civilian aircraft, mainly due to its record-breaking size. After completing a pre-production design study for a Japanese copy, designated K-51, both the Reich Ministry of Aviation and the representatives reached a licensing and manufacturing agreement. To this end, a team of Junkers engineers and personnel were sent to Japan to support Mitsubishi. In 1931, a prototype was successfully flown in Japan by Zimmermann, the same test pilot that flew the G38, and the first 2 models of the Mitsubishi Ki-20 variant using Junkers parts were completed the following year. 4 more Ki-20s were built up until 1935. However, these were made with Japanese components and slightly differed from their original German counterparts. During World War II, the Japanese Air Force planned for the Ki-20 to serve in different transport and support roles, including as bombers. To this end, the models were armed with 6 gun positions and with a massive maximum bomb load of 11,020 pounds. Soon after, the German-inspired aircraft became part of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. The type's primary mission during the conflict was to attack the forts at the entrance of Manila Bay in the Philippines, as well as for deep penetration missions into Siberia. Still, during the type's service with the Japanese Air Force, several engine upgrades were developed to address the persistent issue of insufficient power. Nevertheless, the model's existence and the joint cooperation between Japan and Germany before the Tripartite Pact were kept a secret. As a result, the models were issued their out-of-sequence Kitai No. 20 until 1940, when the hidden cooperation was finally revealed. While Hugo Junkers believed the now extinct model would be the basis for his original dream of building a flying wing-type aircraft with a capacity for 500 passengers, he realized it was not possible after much studying and research. Junkers eventually acknowledged that the future of aviation was in streamlined aircraft with a wide body and thin wings, as the oversized blended wings prevented the G-38 from being as fast as expected. Still, Hugo Junkers' technology with blended wings was later considered and improved by both NASA and Boeing in the 21st century as an alternative to conventional tube and wing aircraft configurations. Despite not being conceived as a military aircraft, the Junkers G-38 technology that astounded the world did eventually participate in and influence World War II combat. In the distance, the growl of engines steadily intensified, signaling the imminent arrival of the B-25 Mitchell. Amid the backdrop of the twilight, patches breached the sky. The battle-worn aircraft proudly bore the scars of its encounters, 400 patches, each coated in the bright yellow of zinc chromate primer. Its worn, distorted airframe maintained a precarious balance, demanding 8 degrees of left aileron trim and 6 degrees of right rudder. This remarkable warbird completed over 300 missions and survived 6 belly landings, making it a living legend. The B-25 Mitchell wasn't an average bomber. It was a true workhorse. While Patches was just one beloved example, the story of the Mitchell was such a success that it spanned roughly 10,000 aircraft that fought across the globe. In the late 1930s, the U.S. Army Air Corps recognized the need for a new medium bomber to deliver a substantial payload over long distances at high speeds. This requirement gave birth to the iconic North American B-25 Mitchell. North American Aviation, or NAA, stepped up to the challenge, using its NA-40B design as the foundation for the B-25. The Air Corps had set the bar high, requiring an aircraft that could transport 2,400 pounds of payload over 1,200 miles at 300 miles per hour. The competition was fierce, with NAA's NA-62 design competing against other contenders. Notably, there was no YB-25 prototype for service tests, but in September 1939, the Air Corps greenlit the NA-62 for production as the B-25, alongside the Martin B-26 Marauder. The B-25 was a distinctive high-wing monoplane with a twin tail and tricycle landing gear. Powered by two 1,700-horsepower Wright radial engines, it featured a wingspan of 67 feet 7 inches and a length of 53 feet 6 inches, accommodating a crew of 4 to 6. With a range of 1,350 miles and a top speed of about 300 miles per hour, it could operate at altitudes up to 24,000 feet. What set the B-25 apart was its capacity to carry 3,000 pounds of bombs internally and even more externally on underwing racks. Named after aviation pioneer Brigadier General William Billy Mitchell, the B-25 Mitchell was ready to become an iconic symbol of American air power. The B-25's journey began in August 1940 with its maiden flight. The U.S. Army Air Corps officially accepted the first 5 B-25s in February 1941. Early in its production, the aircraft faced stability issues due to its wing design. To tackle this, North American Aviation altered the wing's angle, giving birth to the iconic gull-wing shape. NAA continued to refine and develop the B-25, resulting in various series. The B-25A and B entered USAAF service, with the B-25B becoming operational in 1942. Combat requirements pushed for further advancements, leading to the B-25C and D series. The B-25's highly attuned characteristics made it a key player in World War II. Its production went up to almost 10,000 airframes built in numerous variants. This remarkable achievement earned the B-25 the title of the most produced American medium bomber and the third most produced American bomber overall. The most numerous variant, the J model, returned to its original role as a level bomber. But in the Pacific, field-modified J models with solid noses became effective low-level attackers, armed with up to 14 forward-firing heavy machine guns. North American Aviation's contribution to the war effort was immense, producing not only the B-25, but also other aircraft like the AT-6 Texan and the iconic P-51 Mustang, all of them in large numbers. This bomber was a true workhorse. It served in all theaters of war and left a lasting impression in the Mediterranean and Pacific regions. Its adaptability led to various modifications, with models like the G and H introducing heavier firepower, including a 75mm cannon and additional 50 caliber machine guns. As the war progressed, the need for a more potent anti-shipping aircraft became apparent. This led to the creation of the B-25G. The most striking feature of the G was its shortened nose, which housed two fixed 50 caliber machine guns and an astonishing 75mm M4 cannon, one of the largest weapons ever mounted in an aircraft. The cannon was placed behind the pilot and manually loaded by the navigator, who sat just behind the cockpit. When ready, the pilot could fire this massive gun with a button on the control wheel. Despite its firepower, the B-25G didn't find widespread adoption. The series included prototypes, pre-production models, modifications, and production versions, totaling 464 units. The final G-12 model removed the lower turret and incorporated various armaments. The B-25H took the concept of the gunship to the next level. Equipped with a 75mm M4 gun and an array of machine guns, it was a fearsome sight. Some B-25Hs replaced the 75mm gun due to its slow firing rate. These gunships were armed with an impressive 10 50 caliber machine guns, a 75mm cannon, rockets, and the ability to carry up to 3,000 pounds of bombs. The cockpit layout was also modified, eliminating the co-pilot station and moving the dorsal turret forward. In total, 405 B-25Gs and 1,000 B-25Hs were produced, with some serving in the U.S. Navy as PBJ-1Hs. The B-25 Mitchell played a crucial role in World War II. One of its most iconic moments came during the daring Tokyo raid on April 18, 1942, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. What made this mission extraordinary was that the B-25s would launch from the flight deck of the carrier USS Hornet, a feat previously unheard of for medium bombers. Just 4 months after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, the raid had a significant psychological impact. Although the physical damage was relatively minor, it forced Japan to divert troops for home defense throughout the war. The mission was not without its challenges, including fuel issues, stormy conditions, and navigation problems. Despite these setbacks, the raid served as a morale booster to the Americans and showed that Japan was not invulnerable. However, one Mitchell bomber was arguably invulnerable. Crooked and hole-ridden, a B-25C from the 321st Bomb Group, lovingly nicknamed Patches, was undeniable proof that the type was die-hard. Its crew chief painted every flak hole patch with bright yellow zinc chromate primer, earning it its unique moniker. By the end of the war, Patches accumulated an astonishing track record. It had completed over 300 missions, belly-landed 6 times, and had more than 400 patched-up holes. The battle scars on Patches were so severe that the airframe itself was distorted. To keep this beast flying straight and level, the crew had to use 8 degrees of left aileron trim and 6 degrees of right rudder. This resulted in a peculiar sight, as the aircraft would crab sideways across the sky. Despite its battle-worn appearance and the odds stacked against it, the B-25 Mitchell proved to be a true survivor. Its ability to withstand tremendous punishment and keep flying was a testament to the aircraft's rugged design and the skill of the crews who operated it. The B-25 Mitchell continued to prove itself in the Pacific theater. Precision strikes against Japanese airfields, beach defenses, and enemy shipping became its forte. The B-25 engaged in strafing runs and employed skip bombing tactics, making it a recurring weapon against the Axis powers. Originally designed for medium-altitude level bombing, the B-25 found itself executing treetop-level strafing missions and parachute-retarded fragmentation bomb runs. As the war raged on, the B-25 evolved to meet the challenges of various combat scenarios. Modifications, such as plexiglass domes for navigational sightings, heavier nose armament, de-icing and anti-icing equipment, enhanced its capabilities. But it wasn't just the United States that utilized this outstanding aircraft. The B-25 served under the flags of various Allied nations, adapting to the diverse theaters of war. From the Aleutian Islands to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands to Burma, it proved its worth. The B-25's adaptability extended to striking targets in Indochina, Formosa, and Kyushu, while its role in short-range raids and missions against Japanese-occupied islands solidified its position as a cornerstone of American air power. In October 1942, the B-25 Mitchell took center stage in the North African theater of World War II. These American medium bombers played a crucial role during the Second Battle of El Alamein. First, they were used to target Axis airfields, curtailing the enemy's ability to retaliate effectively and diminishing their attack capabilities. Second, they supported ground forces by performing strafing and bombing runs on motorized columns. But their mission didn't stop there. The B-25s went on to Sicily, Italy, and beyond, transitioning into ground attack roles. They disrupted transportation networks across Italy, Austria, and the Balkans. This was possible thanks to their extended range. It's worth noting that in the Mediterranean theater of operations, only U.S. units, specifically the 9th and 12th Air Forces, employed the B-25 in Europe. 5 bombardment groups and 20 squadrons used these capable aircraft, demonstrating their significance in the theater. Recognizing its versatility and hoping to take advantage of its durability, across the English Channel, the Royal Air Force adopted the B-25 Mitchell, replacing their existing bombers. The Mitchell officially joined the RAF in January 1943, initially used for bombing missions over occupied Europe. After the Normandy invasion, both the RAF and French forces actively deployed B-25 Mitchells, contributing significantly to the Allied campaign in Europe. The B-25 Mitchell left an indelible mark, playing a pivotal role in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and ultimately Europe, helping secure the Allied victory. Even after the war, it continued to serve, with the Air Force using it as a liaison aircraft and light transport well into the mid-1950s. The B-25 Mitchell, celebrated for its iconic role in World War II, was favored by pilots for its forgiving flight characteristics, capable of sharp 60-degree banking turns on one engine. Engine-out directional control was crucial after takeoff, using the rudder to prevent loss of control. The tricycle landing gear provided excellent ground visibility, but had a drawback: deafeningly loud engines due to design limitations, causing hearing loss for many pilots and crew members. This unique aircraft combined exceptional stability and handling with a noisy drawback, making it a memorable presence in aviation history. The B-25 Mitchell wasn't just a run-of-the-mill bomber. It had a whole host of roles up its sleeve. It pulled double duty as an F-10 reconnaissance aircraft, an AT-24 crew trainer, and even as the PBJ-1 patrol bomber for the Marine Corps. Even after World War II, the B-25 wasn't ready to retire. In 1952, the USAF teamed up with Hayes of Birmingham, Alabama, to create the B-25L trainer. This program was all about keeping the B-25's legacy alive by training the next generation of pilots, making it a bridge to the future of aviation. In the B-25's development journey, an intriguing offshoot came in the form of the North American XB-28 Dragon. This high-altitude bomber had 2 prototypes, with the second one, the XB-28A, being repurposed for photo reconnaissance missions. However, the XB-28 never took off, leaving the B-25 Mitchell as the enduring symbol of North American aviation's contributions to aviation history. This iconic and tough aircraft, with its impressive track record, stands as a testament to American engineering and the dedication of the people who flew it. On a crisp morning in April 1950, the engines of the PB-4Y-2 Privateer, nicknamed the Turbulent Turtle, roared to life on a runway of Wiesbaden, West Germany. This aircraft, a veteran of World War II's Pacific Theater, prepared for a journey deep into the Baltic Sea's tension-filled skies. The Privateer, with its advanced modifications, was a shadow in the sky, a ghostly presence, tasked with a mission as dangerous as it was crucial. It would pierce the Iron Curtain and gather critical electronic and signals intelligence. The Turbulent Turtle, born from the legacy of the B-24 Liberator and adapted for the Navy's demanding requirements, was no ordinary aircraft. Its fuselage had been stretched to accommodate state-of-the-art electronic countermeasures and radar antennas, transforming it into a flying fortress, bristling with a dozen 50-caliber machine guns. But as the turbulent turtle neared the coast of Liepaja, Latvia, the quiet hum of its engines was soon drowned out by the ominous roar of Soviet La-11 fighters. As the Soviet fighters closed in, the crew of the turbulent turtle faced a dire situation. Their mission of intelligence gathering suddenly became secondary to the immediate challenge of survival. The B-24 Liberator was a 4-engine heavy bomber aircraft used extensively by the United States Army Air Forces throughout World War II. It was produced in more numbers than any other American military aircraft of its era, with over 18,000 units built. The B-24 featured a distinctive twin-tail design and a high-mounted Davis wing, providing long range and high speed. Its large bomb bay could carry around 8,000 pounds, making it well-suited for strategic bombing operations. Powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 radial engines, the B-24 had a maximum speed of over 300 miles per hour and a range of more than 2,000 miles. It carried a crew of 10, including pilots, bombardiers, gunners, and navigators. The B-24 bomber played an essential role in bombing campaigns against Axis targets in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific Theater. Its popularity resided in its wide range of mission compatibility, which included long-range strategic bombing, anti-submarine patrols, and airborne supply operations. Nevertheless, despite its versatility and effectiveness, the B-24 was known for its challenging handling characteristics, earning it the nickname the Flying Coffin among some crews. Still, the bomber's popularity convinced the United States Navy to employ it with a modified airframe for its naval operations. The first bombers delivered to the Navy were dubbed PB-4Y-1 Liberators and featured minor naval modifications. Other conversions included using a tail belonging to a Douglas B-23 Dragon, a vertical fin from a C-54 transport, and even the experimentation of a ball turret instead of the standard nose turret. Even after all these iterations, the Navy was unsatisfied and asked Consolidated Aircraft for a fully fledged navalized design. The result was the PB-4Y-2 Privateer, first delivered in 1943 for the Navy for dedicated long-range patrols and bombing operations. The Privateer was relatively similar to the Liberator, but it was tailored specifically for naval operations. First and foremost, the fuselage was lengthened to house a Vigilant Flight Engineer station, where the operator managed the central aircraft systems. Another change included the position of the navigator's astrodome, which was moved from the upper nose to a location behind the first dorsal gun turret. The radar antennas and electronic countermeasure communication equipment were also spread out through the fuselage, protruding from several sides, as was the case with the innovative AN/APS-2 radome that was retractable behind the nose wheel. Secondly, the Privateer stood out from its big brother with a unique vertical stabilizer, a departure from its predecessor's standard twin-tail configuration. Forged from the remnants of another USAAF prototype, the B-24N, the Privateer's single tail bolstered stability and enhanced maneuverability at medium altitudes generally used for naval operations. Armed to the teeth with 12 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, the Privateer was armed with a defensive arsenal that boasted power and precision, omitting the Liberator's ventral turret for weight-saving measures. The M2 machine guns were strategically placed along the Privateer to protect it from all zones and shoot down any enemy threat that sought to flank it. Freed from the encumbrance of turbochargers, as the aircraft was not required to fly at high altitudes, the Privateer ascended the skies with lethal agility. Crafted for the arduous demands of maritime missions, this adaptation aimed to combat pilot fatigue, a persistent foe in prolonged patrols, which included an additional seat for a flight engineer crew member. The first units of the Privateer entered service in late 1943, but did not begin to make an impact until the last months of 1944. Patrol Bomber Squadrons 118 and 119 were the first fleet squadrons to be equipped with the new aircraft. The majority of the 739 Privateers were delivered to the U.S. Navy after the conclusion of the global conflict in Europe. Nevertheless, several squadrons managed to see service in the Pacific Theater, commencing on January 6, 1945, and, according to their crews, delivered outstanding performances. These units excelled in various roles, including surveillance, search and rescue, electronic countermeasures, and communication relays in the Marianas. The privateers also ravaged the Pacific with offensive operations, beginning in March 1945. The Chinese coasts and the northern portion of Okinawa were subjected to offensive missions conducted by Patrol Bomber Squadron 119 out of Clark Field in the Philippines. Privateers also conducted military operations in the Gulf of Tonkin and the skies above French Indochina before the Japanese surrender. During the invasion of the volcanic island of Iwo Jima, Navy privateers conducted 16-hour-long operations, which searched for a range of objectives from enemy radar, radio and navigation stations, troop ships, land objectives, and sea targets. They also reported on weather conditions, enemy positions, and operations, located downed airmen over the sea, and coordinated SAR or search and rescue operations. As if that was not enough, the Navy privateers also provided cover for Army Air Force's B-29 bomber operations above the skies of mainland Japan. Besides its military role, the Navy also employed the PB-4Y2 privateers for typhoon and hurricane hunters during the last months of the war against the Japanese Empire. Monitoring typhoons was on occasion more dangerous than flying over active combat zones. Such was the tragedy of Buno's 59415 and 59716, which were lost during hurricane hunting missions. The initial aircraft suffered a mechanical failure and went down during an examination of a Category 1 typhoon in the vicinity of Bataan Island near the Philippines. The second aircraft was lost during a Super Typhoon Doris reconnaissance mission on December 16, 1953, near the small island of Agrian north of Guam. However, no trace of the crew or wreckage of the plane was ever found. Despite their aging technology, the Navy employed the privateers successfully during the outbreak of the Korean War. Following the invasion of South Korea by the Communist forces of the North in June 1950, the Navy deployed its PB-4Y2 privateers for patrol missions to detect Chinese or North Korean seaborne infiltrators. PB-4Y2s flew through the darkness on daring Firefly missions, their engines roaring as they dropped parachute flares to illuminate the treacherous terrain below for the United Nations troops engaging the enemy in nighttime operations, or provide them with better visibility when besieged by communist soldiers. With each flare cast into the night, the pilots faced enemy fire. They navigated through the chaos to detect and thwart North Korean and Chinese seaborne infiltrators. But the privateers' valor extended far beyond the Korean peninsula. Along the frigid waters of the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, these Navy aircraft served as the vanguard of intelligence, their wings slicing through enemy airspace as they conducted vital signals intelligence or SIGINT flights. These missions were considered high risk and had high rewards, as they required the aircraft to approach or penetrate enemy territory, to eavesdrop on enemy radar signals or radio traffic. The air-to-ground and air-to-air communication between interception controllers and pilots was precious for intelligence analysts. The easiest way to obtain this information was to provoke the enemy's air defenses to launch an aircraft interception. On April 8, 1950, Soviet La-11 fighters unleashed a hail of fire against a PB-4Y2 privateer known as the Turbulent Turtle. Assigned to Patrol Squadron 26, or VP-26, the brave crew met their fate off the coast of Liepaja, Latvia, after enemy anti-aircraft fire tore through the fuselage of the aircraft. The shooting down of the American aircraft by the USSR led to new tensions between both nations, with the Soviet Union stating, quote, "The plane penetrated the territory of the Soviet Union to a distance of 21 kilometers. A flight of Soviet fighters took off from a nearby airdrome and demanded that the American plane follow it and land at the airdrome. The American plane not only failed to comply with this demand, but opened fire on the Soviet planes. Owing to this, an advanced Soviet fighter was forced to open fire in reply, after which the American plane turned toward the sea and disappeared. The privateer's crew was never seen again." During the early years of the Cold War, the privateers were also considered for delivery of nuclear weapons. Some PB-4Y2s were specially modified to deliver second-generation atomic bombs, but none were used to conduct tests during their service. Over 40 privateers were also given to the Nationalist Chinese Air Force, led by Chiang Kai-shek, to help them fight against the Communist forces led by Mao during the Chinese Civil War. They were employed in similar roles, but were ultimately destroyed or captured by the Red Chinese People's Army Air Force when Chiang Kai-shek retreated to Taiwan. Other post-war combat services included the French Air Force. Like China and Korea, French Indochina was engulfed in a civil war between the colonial regime and the communist insurgents, led by a nationalistic leader, Ho Chi Minh. The war between the French and the Viet Minh escalated in the early 1950s, leading the military to request military assets from other allies. As a result, over 20 privateers were provided to the Aéronautique Navale for service with the French colonial army in Vietnam. The reliable privateers were used as strategic bombers to destroy Viet Minh troops scattered across the countryside and the jungles of Southeast Asia. The aircraft remained operational until the French colonial troops were decisively defeated during the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Only 4 out of 22 aircraft were lost in combat. 6 were returned to U.S. service, and the remaining 12 were flown to North Africa, where they fought in the Algerian uprising and later during the Suez Incident of the late 1950s. In 1961, the operational privateers were scrapped in favor of the new American Lockheed P-2V Neptunes. As for those that remained under American Navy control, they were retired in 1954 and transferred to the U.S. Coast Guard. Some were adapted as radio control target drones off Point Magu, California in the early 1960s. The last privateer, flying under call sign Opposite 31 and carrying the ironic nickname Lucky Pierre, was shot down by a bullpup missile with an experimental proximity fuse that turned the bullpup into an air-to-air weapon. When the U.S. Coast Guard no longer found a use for its search and rescue privateers, the aging aircraft became anti-forest fire water bombers. These Coast Guard privateers removed the side and nose turrets and rebuilt the nose with a vast glazed observation dome. Some privateers also found their way to the civilian market after being sold as surplus. Civilians who purchased them gave the aircraft new life after modifying them with new Wright R2600 engines and the installation of borate water slurry tanks to use them as air tankers. These civilian-modified aircraft were known as super privateers and remained in service until 2002, bringing the life of the aircraft to an end almost 6 decades after its introduction. It's 1942. While the world is engulfed in war, a different kind of battle is about to unfold in a hidden corner of the Pacific. On a secluded Japanese airfield, 5 aircraft await. An imported German Messerschmitt Bf-109E, a captured American Curtiss P-40E, and 3 Japanese models, the Ki-43, Ki-44I, and the newcomer, Ki-61. Kawasaki's latest creation, the Ki-61 Hien, was Japan's first ever model with a liquid-cooled inverted V engine. So unique is its design that Allied intelligence, mistaking it for a European model, had already dubbed it Tony. While Kawasaki is confident in their groundbreaking design, top commanders at the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force headquarters remain skeptical. This competition is set to challenge their doubts. As engines ignite, the sky transforms into an aerial arena. One by one, the aircraft leap into the air, their pilots pushing machines to their limits. The Ki-61, powered by its 1175 horsepower engine, begins to outclimb, outmaneuver, and outpace the other models in a series of tests. With this, the doubt on the officers' faces slowly gives way to outright awe. Soon after, the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien would be deployed throughout the Pacific theater. The most un-Japanese-looking fighter was ready to take the skies by storm. In the 1930s, while Europe embraced liquid-cooled inline engines, Japan and the United States focused on air-cooled radials, shaping their aircraft design for years to come. While the Americans introduced the Allison V-1710 engine in 1937, the Japanese Air Force struggled to create an equally powerful or comparable power plant. This meant that by the time the Empire joined World War II, pilots across the Pacific predominantly relied on radial engines. But change was on the horizon, thanks to Kawasaki. After the Army chose the Nakajima Ki-27 over Kawasaki's Ki-28, top executives reached out to their German ally, Daimler-Benz, to negotiate a license for their DB601A, their newest 12-cylinder inverted V engine. By April 1940, Kawasaki designers secured the blueprints and immediately began adapting them to Japanese production. The first of its kind, the HA-40, was completed by the summer of the following year. The engine, delivering 1,175 horsepower for takeoff and 1,100 horsepower at 13,780 feet, had a sophisticated cooling system that used a water and ethylene glycol mixture to manage temperatures effectively, even under the most extreme conditions. Interestingly, by then, Kawasaki had approached the Army with an intriguing proposal. With reports coming in from the new war in Europe, where aircraft powered by liquid-cooled engines were clearly superior, the company suggested a duo of single-seat, single-engine fighters using the same HA-40 power plant: the Ki-60, a heavy interceptor fighter, and the Ki-61, a lighter all-purpose fighter. While the Kokuhonbu, or Imperial Japanese Army Air Force Headquarters, initially approved both models for production by December 1940, the emphasis soon shifted to the Ki-61 alone. This new fighter was developed by Shin Iwata and Takeo Doi, both of whom had worked under the watchful eye of German aircraft designer Richard Vogt. Precisely 1 year after being greenlit to proceed, the Ki-61, the first and only mass-produced Japanese fighter of World War II to use a liquid-cooled inverted V engine, was completed at the Kakamigahara plant in central Japan in December 1941, just in time to fight against the Americans. As dawn broke on April 18, 1942, the skies over Tokyo erupted with an unexpected roar as 16 North American B-25 Mitchells, launched from the carrier USS Hornet, penetrated Japanese airspace. This attack, a daring strike led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, also referred to as the Tokyo Raid, brought war to Japan's doorstep for the first time, shattering the nation's sense of invulnerability held since Pearl Harbor. Caught off guard, Japanese military leaders scrambled to mount a response. In the midst of the chaos, hangars in central Japan opened to reveal a small pre-production batch of new Kawasaki Ki-61 fighters, taking to the sky in a desperate bid to repel the American intruders. The Hien, Japanese for Swallow, was a low-wing monoplane of all-metal construction and the Air Force's first attempt to incorporate armor protection and a self-sealing fuel tank in a fighter design. The model included an armored windshield and a half-inch thick plate at the rear of the enclosed cockpit with a backward-sliding canopy. It was armed with a pair of 12 7mm HO-103 machine guns that operated in unison, ready for combat. To the trained observer and to many pilots flying about Tokyo that day, the Ki-61 shared similarities with foreign aircraft designs. It was so different from the usual radial-engined Imperial fighters that United States Army Air Force Captain C. Ross and many others believed it to be a license-built Messerschmitt Bf-109. In early reports from the Doolittle Raid, one of the first major wins for the Americans, the aircraft was initially codenamed Mike. However, the final and better-known codename for the Ki-61 was Tony, due to its striking resemblance to an Italian Regia Aeronautica model. During the Doolittle Raid, the Allies were quite astonished by the new model's speed, armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armament. With this impressive debut, the type saw a rapid development phase, beginning with 11 additional prototypes and pre-production models in early 1942, with the first production model finished that same August. During trials, test pilots praised the Ki-61 for its features and, most importantly, dive performance. However, its high wing loading, a measure of the weight an aircraft's wings must support, affecting maneuverability, takeoff and landing abilities, and stall speed, was viewed with a skeptical eye by senior Kokuhonbu officers, who preferred the more maneuverable and lightly armed Nakajima Ki-43. To settle the debate, Kawasaki organized a fly-off consisting of prototypes of the Ki-43 and Ki-44, an imported Messerschmitt Bf-109E, a recently captured Curtiss P-40E, and the Ki-61 itself. To the surprise of the officers, the Ki-61 beat all the models at every single feature, except for maneuverability in the Ki-43. Knowing that they had an aircraft with a lot of potential in their hands, the delivery process was expedited, with initial deliveries made in February 1943 to the 23rd Dokuditsu Dai Shijugochu-dai at Oda, a pilot conversion and training unit. Combat operations ignited 2 months later when the 68th and 78th Sentais deployed to Wewak in northern New Guinea. That spring, these Tonys proved much better suited to combat American and Australian aircraft than the Ki-43s they supplemented, especially due to their high diving speed. As this model expanded, popping up in nearly all corners of the theater, the Allied Air Force's commander in the Southwest Pacific, General George Kenney, believing his Curtiss P-40s to be completely outclassed, reached out to his superiors and essentially begged for more Lockheed P-38 Lightnings to counter this new threat. this did not mean the aircraft came without issues. In fact, what set it apart ultimately became its downfall. In the air, the Ki-61 Tony was a sight to behold, adored by its pilots and respected by its adversaries. Yet, its modern liquid-cooled inverted V-engine, while powerful, proved to be a temperamental beast on the ground, particularly in the sweltering heat and stifling humidity of the Pacific theater. This weakness was further exposed when both initial units were deployed to the dense, unforgiving jungles of New Guinea. These challenges, coupled with a dwindling pool of skilled technicians, meant that neither the sleek Tonys nor their brave pilots could often unleash their full potential. The campaign in New Guinea initially saw some success for the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. However, as the Allies regrouped and bolstered their air power, the tide quickly turned against the Empire, leading to mounting losses that painted the skies with falling Tonys. Even beyond combat, the aircraft suffered significant losses. The biggest example was the 78th Sentai, which lost more than half of its 30 Ki-61s during a routine transit between Truk and Rabaul, forcing the survivors to limp to their nearest service depot for urgent repairs. Despite these setbacks, over 3,000 Ki-61s rolled off the production lines. Late 1943 saw an upgrade in firepower, with the addition of two 20mm H-05 cannons nestled in the wings. Among the Tony's pilots, Major Shogo Takeuchi of the 68th Sentai stood out, claiming 16 enemy aircraft over the skies of New Guinea before his final, fateful flight in December 1943. Even with its flaws, the Ki-61 continued to sow fear and uncertainty in Allied aviation circles, especially in one particular role. By the summer of 1944, Japan's strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly. In August, as losses mounted, a fleet of American Boeing B-29 Superfortress heavy bombers pierced Japanese airspace, their sights set on the vital steel factories of Iwata. The 4th Sentai scrambled to intercept, but reaching a B-29 was no small feat. Sergeant Shigeo Nobe, piloting his Ki-45 fighter, pushed his radial engine to its absolute limits. As he finally neared the B-29's cruising altitude, Nobe made a radical decision and directly rammed his aircraft into the massive American monster. With this, not only did the pilot destroy his intended target, but he also damaged another B-29 with the ensuing debris. This audacious act caught the attention of the growingly desperate Japanese High Command, who soon ordered more attacks of this nature. By early November, ramming attacks had become official policy, with dedicated flights formed to challenge the B-29s at their lofty heights. For this perilous mission, one particular aircraft stood out, the Ki-61, as its liquid-cooled engine could propel it to the staggering altitudes of over 30,000 feet where B-29s operated, while its potent 4-cannon array packed the punch needed to bring down these flying fortresses. To maximize performance, these Hiens were stripped down, and their fuselage armament and protective systems were all sacrificed for altitude. Captain Takashi Fujita, commander of the 244th Fighter Group, assembled a ramming flight dubbed Hagakure Tai, or Special Attack Unit, composed of volunteers from 3 squadrons, and led by the intrepid First Lieutenant Toru Shinomiya. While the Imperial Air Force did not officially label these ramming missions as kamikaze attacks, the nature of their task was clear. On December 3, 1944, Lieutenant Shinomiya and his 2 wingmen, Sergeants Masao Itagaki and Matsumi Nakano, took to the skies over Japan to intercept an incoming B-29 raid. After spotting their heavy targets, in a heart-stopping moment, he aimed his Ki-61 at the massive bomber and collided. Despite losing most of his port outer wing, Shinomiya managed to land his crippled fighter back at base. Meanwhile, Sergeant Itagaki engaged another B-29 in a fierce duel. His aircraft, battered from the encounter, forced him to bail out in his parachute. The third man, Nakano, executed a perfect ram on a B-29 from the U.S. Army Air Force's 498th Bombardment Group. Just like his leader's flying abilities, with his stripped-down Ki-61 badly damaged, he skillfully guided it to a controlled crash landing in a nearby field. After this successful mission, the 3 Hien pilots became the first recipients of the Bukosho, Japan's equivalent to the Medal of Honor, which had been inaugurated just days before by Emperor Hirohito. While the existence of this elite ramming unit had been kept confidential, the announcement of the 3 men's awards saw it officially revealed and named the Shinten Sekutai, or Body Attack Detachment. From then until the war's end, a total of 89 men received this merit, most of whom fought and scored against B-29s while piloting Ki-61s. Not long after their major mission, on January 27, 1945, Sergeant Itagaki survived another ramming attack on a B-29, again parachuting to safety. He received a second Bukosho, becoming one of only two who received it twice, and the only man to survive the conflict. Despite their successful attacks against one of the most intimidating Allied aircraft of the war, these pilots, while celebrated as elite volunteers, gained no respite. They were forced to continue these dangerous ramming tactics until they were too badly wounded to fly, or worse. With a new year blooming, and with Japan's situation growing increasingly desperate, the Ki-61 found further roles in actual kamikaze missions and in operational training units. Also, in January 1945, the Akashi engine plant, where the HA-40 power plants were produced, was destroyed by American forces. This devastating blow left hundreds of airframes without engines, leading to the hurried introduction of the Ki-100, a Tony variant fitted with the Mitsubishi HA-112-2 radial engine. Still, the remaining Ki-61s fought until the very end of the war, defending Formosa, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and the Japanese homeland. They engaged with everything from B-29 bombers to United States Navy carrier aircraft and P-51 Mustangs. By the end of the Pacific Campaign, nearly 2,000 Japanese Ki-61s had been lost in air attacks, mostly from consolidated B-24 Liberators and North American B-25 Mitchells armed with fragmentation bombs. Following the Japanese retreat, hundreds of aircraft wrecks were discovered, scattered across the region. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, or Tony, stands as one of the oft-forgotten yet impressive Japanese fighter designs of World War II. Despite numerous developmental challenges, the model often proved to be a lethal adversary. With its powerful armament, ample protection for both pilot and fuel, and impressive performance with old-school maneuverability, the Ki-61 was capable of putting up a fierce fight against virtually anything offered by the Allies at the time. Throughout World War II, the Royal Air Force successfully developed many fighter aircraft to confront the feared Luftwaffe. Still, several fighters were largely forgotten and eclipsed by the powerful German warplanes, and the Westland Whirlwind was one of them. A highly capable twin-engine heavy fighter, the Whirlwind was one of the fastest combat aircraft when it first took to the skies, as well as the world's most heavily armed fighter. With 4 Hispano-Suiza HS-404 20mm autocannons mounted on its nose, the type was explicitly made to fire hundreds of rounds per second. The Whirlwind consistently served over the English Channel as the Battle of Britain approached, and was expected to destroy anything that came in its path. That is, until its own engines got in the way. As the prospect of war with Germany became more likely in the 1930s, the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force evaluated its current aircraft shortcomings. While the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire fighters were extremely advanced designs for their time, both warplanes had a short range and were only armed with Browning machine guns. It was thus believed that a longer-range heavy fighter armed with cannons would be needed to destroy the German bombers and to escort British bombers on raids deep into enemy territory. By then, several aircraft designers around the world also perceived that increased attack top speeds were imposing shorter firing times on fighter pilots, translating into less ammunition hitting the target. After a thorough study, the British Air Ministry decided that instead of the more common setup, consisting of 2 rifle-caliber machine guns, a fighter with up to 8 would deliver 256 rounds per second. As such, the Air Ministry issued an operational requirement in 1935 calling for a single-seat day and night heavy fighter armed with 4 cannons. Also, the new aircraft's top speed had to be at least 330 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, which was at least 40 miles per hour higher than all other contemporary bombers. After receiving proposals from several British aircraft manufacturers, the Air Ministry took 2 years for evaluations until the submission from Westland Aircraft was selected. The design team had just undergone a restructuring and was led by William Edward Willoughby Teddy Petter. The new company leading engineer was a former student of aerodynamics at Cambridge University and had an innate understanding of how air flowed around aircraft, thus designing an aircraft that employed state-of-the-art technology and ultimately convincing the demanding Air Ministry. The Westland Whirlwind fighter was a highly innovative design for its time. With a set of two Rolls-Royce Kestrel engines mounted in pods underneath the low wings, the motor was a proven and reliable model, also used in interwar British aircraft such as the Hawker Fury biplane fighter. The Whirlwind was also the first British fighter with a bubble canopy, providing excellent vision. The initial prototype was made of all metal, with a magnesium skin on the fuselage's rear, and made its maiden flight in October of 1938, just as the war loomed closer. The initial flight tests were so promising that the Air Ministry almost ordered the aircraft into immediate production. However, the Westland engineers decided that the Kestrel engine should be replaced with a newly developed, upgraded and supercharged Rolls-Royce engine, the Peregrine. Westland was aiming for improved all-around performance by producing over 850 horsepower compared to the 650 of the Kestrel. The engines were cooled by ducted radiators fitted in the inner section of the wing to reduce drag. These also provided cockpit heat, something that was lacking in many other Royal Air Force models of the period. By early 1939, the Whirlwind program was finally at a point in which the Air Ministry could place large-scale orders. As such, the office ordered 200 aircraft as a first batch, and 200 more as a second. On paper, the aircraft came from a record-breaking and incredibly unique design, and the Royal Air Force officials hoped that its new warplane would be decisive in changing the tide of the war. Consequently, the model was kept under wraps from the general public until 1942. The first production Whirlwind flew its maiden flight in June of 1940, and deliveries began the following month. The Royal Air Force 263rd Squadron, still reforming at the Grangemouth Air Base in Scotland after suffering devastating losses in the Norwegian campaign, was the first to receive the model on July 6th. Despite an urgent need for fighters during the Battle of Britain during the summer and autumn of 1940, the 263rd Squadron remained in Scotland, as deliveries of the Westland Whirlwind fighters were rolling out slower than initially planned. The aircraft were declared fully operational on December 7, 1940, and initial operations consisted of convoy patrols and hunting and destroying German E-boats in the English Channel. From early 1941, the 263rd Squadron had considerable success flying the Whirlwind against the feared German Air Force Junkers Ju-88s, Dornier Do-217s, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and Focke-Wulf FW-190s. The first air-to-air fatal hit credited to a Westland Whirlwind occurred on February 8, 1941, when a pilot of the 263rd Squadron shot down an Arado AR-196 floatplane. At the time of its introduction, the model's 4 Hispano Mark I 20mm cannon armament, capable of delivering a weight of fire of up to 600 pounds of explosive shells per minute, was the most powerful armament of any aircraft in the world. These cannons were increasingly used in their ground attack and bomber escort roles throughout the next 2 years. However, they were prone to jamming, and the metal often caused bruises on the pilot's hands while shooting. With a maximum speed of 360 miles per hour, similar to early versions of the Spitfire fighter, the Whirlwind also had an operational range of almost twice that of its contemporaries. And while its overall performance was reasonable, many Royal Air Force pilots noted that its maneuverability fell short of initial expectations. However, the aircraft had an even more crucial issue. Its engines were both underpowered and unreliable. The record-breaking Rolls-Royce Merlin was the main engine used by the Royal Air Force throughout most of World War II, but the Whirlwind used the far inferior Rolls-Royce Peregrine, machines that consumed 3 times the aircraft alloy as the prized Spitfire. As France fell to the Germans, the British government scrambled to prepare for the seemingly inevitable Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940, and the War Cabinet ordered that all resources be directed for the nation's defense. Thus, attention inevitably switched to building as many Spitfire and Hurricane fighter aircraft as possible. To streamline production, the Rolls-Royce company decided to focus on producing the Merlin engine used in both fighters, practically halting the entire development of the Peregrine motor. While some officials discussed the possibility of continuing production of the Whirlwind by replacing the Peregrine with the Merlin engine, the action would have required a significant and costly redesign, as the latter was both larger and heavier. With all resources focused on the Merlin, the Peregrine was only produced 301 times, and this lack of engines also halted the production of the Whirlwind. The last of only 116 Whirlwinds was delivered to the Royal Air Force in January of 1942. Even though fewer Whirlwinds than initially expected were ultimately produced, those in service still had a long way to go. With the performance of the Peregrine engines lacking at high altitudes, the Whirlwind was relegated to mostly performing ground attack missions over France. 67 models were eventually converted to a fighter-bomber configuration with underwing racks capable of carrying 2 500-pound bombs. These modified Whirlwinds, nicknamed Whirly Bombers, blasted hundreds of locomotives, bridges, shipping, and other targets all over northern France. In September of 1941, the 137th Squadron, a unit specialized in attacks against railway targets, received its first Westland Whirlwind. However, as 1943 approached, new cannon fighters like the Typhoon were available for ground attack duties, leading to the withdrawal of the Whirlwind after a very short wartime service life. The final flight of a Westland Whirlwind was recorded in June of 1943 after an attack by the 263rd Squadron on a German airfield at Poix, France. Then, the following January, the type was officially declared obsolete by the Royal Air Force. While the Westland Whirlwind was a capable fighter and ground attack aircraft, its development was hampered by an unreliable and later unavailable engine. Despite its shortcomings, the Whirlwind was well liked by most pilots. According to Sergeant G.L. Buckwell of the 263rd Squadron, who was shot down while flying a mission in France, the type was, quote, great to fly. We were a privileged few. In retrospect, the lesson of the Whirlwind is clear. A radical aircraft requires either prolonged development or widespread service to exploit its concept and eliminate its weaknesses. Too often in World War II, such aircraft suffered accelerated development or limited service, with the result that teething difficulties came to be regarded as permanent limitations. The last airworthy Whirlwind was retained by the Westland Company as an executive transport, and was scrapped in 1947. In the end, its limited production ensured that this long-forgotten aircraft never received the recognition given to other Royal Air Force fighters of the era. On a stormy night in June 1941, a Bristol Beaufort, the RAF's first monoplane torpedo bomber, roared through black clouds on the kind of daring mission it was designed for, attacking the German heavy cruiser Lutzow, recently spotted off the coast of Norway. As it fought against the howling winds and turbulent skies, this Beaufort had somehow separated from the rest of the RAF's 42nd Squadron and was now flying solo. Flight Sergeant Ray Lovett gripped the controls tightly. The 22-year-old pilot wasn't normally superstitious, but on this Friday the 13th, the odds felt particularly grim. As the North Sea waves began to shimmer with the first light of dawn, Lovett's heart skipped a beat. There, cutting through the horizon, was the unmistakable silhouette of Lutzow. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. But unlike his Beaufort, the heavy cruiser wasn't alone. Surrounding her were 4 destroyers, their guns bristling in the dim light, and a swarm of Junkers Ju-88s and Messerschmitt Bf-110s patrolling the skies. Getting the bomber close enough to Lutzow to drop its payload would require nerves of steel and a stroke of luck. Lovett's mind raced as he observed the recognition signals exchanged between the German aircraft and the ships. Mimicking these signals was a long shot, but it was his only chance. He held his breath as he sent the coded blinks. To his amazement, the Germans accepted his Beaufort as one of their own. Created by the Bristol Aeroplane Company in response to a 1935 call from the Air Ministry for a land-based twin-engine torpedo bomber, the Beaufort began life as the Bristol Type 152 before being rechristened to honor the Duke of Beaufort, whose ancestral home was not far from Bristol's Filton factory. As the RAF's need for a new torpedo bomber was considered urgent, both the Beaufort and a competing design from rival manufacturer Blackburn, the Botha, were ordered straight off the drawing board. Initially, 320 Beauforts were commissioned. At the time, Bristol was focused on the production of their previous bomber, the Blenheim, so it was decided that they would build 78 units, while the remaining 242 would be assigned to Blackburn. However, these allocations would later change as production demands evolved. Though the Beaufort bore a resemblance to the Blenheim, it was a significantly larger and more powerful aircraft. The wingspan was extended by 18 inches, and the fuselage was lengthened and heightened to accommodate a 4th crew member, making the Beaufort considerably heavier than its predecessor. The bomb bay was expanded to carry a semi-recessed torpedo or a conventional bomb of up to 2,000 pounds. The Beaufort required more power than the Blenheim's Bristol Mercury engines could provide, so it was initially equipped with the more powerful Bristol Perseus motors. However, it soon became clear that even these engines couldn't give the Beaufort the necessary speed. The solution was to switch to the Bristol Taurus engines, designed with low-drag NACA cowlings by chief designer Roy Fenton. These cowlings had innovative vertical slots flanking the nacelles under the wings, allowing for controlled airflow through adjustable flaps. Other refinements that the Beaufort brought to the Blenheim's basic structure included high-strength light alloy forgings and extrusions to replace the older bomber's high-tensile steel plates, making the structure lighter. The wing center section was integrated into the fuselage, and the nacelle structure was part of the main ribs, which supported the main undercarriage units. These were larger than those on the Blenheim and used hydraulic retraction, with an emergency lowering system operated by a cartridge. In mid-1938, the first prototype of the Bristol Beaufort rolled out of the Filton factory. However, testing would get off to a rocky start. The Taurus engines persistently overheated during ground tests, necessitating a redesign of the engine cowlings. New cowlings with circumferential cooling gills were developed and installed, causing delays. Despite these setbacks, the Beaufort took to the skies for the first time on October 15, 1938. As flight testing progressed, another issue emerged. The large apron-type undercarriage doors, based on the ones in the Blenheim, caused the aircraft to yaw during landing. The doors were removed for subsequent flights to address this. More conventional split doors were used on the second prototype and all production models, leaving a small part of the tires exposed when retracted, effectively solving the yaw problem. However, further challenges presented themselves when high-level bombing tests were conducted at Boscombe Down. Flying at 10,000 feet at 238 miles per hour, the aircraft's test pilot described it as, quote, an exceptionally poor bombing platform. These impressions were due to the excessive and continuous rolling, making it extremely difficult to determine drift and achieve bombing accuracy. Despite the Beaufort's flaws, the specter of war was now looming large on the horizon. Demand was high, and not just in Britain. In July 1939, the Australian government placed an order for 180 Beaufort airframes and spares to bolster Australia and Singapore's defenses against the growing threat of Japanese expansionism, and 3 months later, engines, components, and support equipment were shipped out to be put together on arrival. However, with World War II now underway, speculation that shipping further Tauruses from Britain could become complicated led to the decision to replace them with Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engines, which could either be locally made or imported from the US. Other differences of the Australian Beaufort included a larger fin. Meanwhile, back in Britain, production began in earnest in November 1939, with the first units entering service in January 1940 with the 22nd Squadron of RAF Coastal Command, which until then had been made up of Vickers Wildebeest biplanes. The Beaufort was significantly heavier and faster than the Wildebeest, which necessitated extensive crew training in new torpedo-dropping techniques. The lighter, slower biplanes could dive and then flatten out before launching a torpedo, but the Beaufort's higher speed after a dive required greater skill. Achieving a successful hit required the payload to be dropped at exactly the right height, which for 18-inch Mark 12 torpedoes was around 68 feet. With no radio altimeter to guide them, it was common for pilots to misjudge this, causing the torpedo to skip across the water, known as porpoising, or even dive or break up. Many pilots flying the Beaufort found it difficult to correctly analyze the speed and range of their target ships, which tended to look bigger than they were. This would often lead to the pilots underestimating the range and releasing the torpedoes too early, missing the mark. With these challenges compounded by a shortage of torpedoes, it was decided the 22nd Squadron's initial operations with the Beaufort would instead involve laying magnetic mines, known as gardening in RAF terminology, as well as conventional bombing raids. April 1940 saw the Beaufort incorporated into 42nd Squadron and its first operational mission, in which 9 aircraft embarked on a daring mine-laying sortie in the Schillig Roads, north of Wilhelmshaven. However, 1 aircraft failed to return due to issues with the Taurus engines, a pattern repeated in subsequent missions. 9 Beauforts from 42nd Squadron made an attempted attack on the German battleship Scharnhorst in June 1940, but only 4 made it back. In the days that followed, a court of inquiry determined that the engine reliability was a critical problem. Consequently, both 22nd and 42nd Squadrons were grounded until necessary modifications could be made. Once back in the air, 5 Beauforts from 22nd Squadron finally conducted the RAF's first torpedo attack of World War II on September 11, 1940, against a 3-ship merchant convoy off the Belgian coast. 1 torpedo successfully hit its target. However, with doubts still lingering about the reliability of the Taurus engine, Bristol launched the Beaufort Mark II, which featured the twin Wasp engines used by the Australian version. With the new and improved Beaufort making its first flight in November 1940, it would be the following year that the Bristol Beaufort would truly come into its own, as the torpedo bomber it was designed to be. In the early hours of April 6, 1941, 22nd Squadron executed a daring raid on the German battleship Gneisenau at Brest, in northwestern France. Gneisenau, a significant threat due to its Atlantic raiding missions, was undergoing repairs when 6 Beaufort bombers, led by Wing Commander Ken Campbell, launched their attack. Despite struggling through heavy rain, thick sea mist, and intense anti-aircraft fire, Campbell skillfully navigated his aircraft at a dangerously low altitude and released a torpedo that struck the battleship near its stern, causing substantial damage. Campbell and his crew were lost in the explosion's aftermath, but their bravery rendered Gneisenau inoperable for several months, providing critical relief to Allied shipping and earning Campbell a posthumous Victoria Cross. Just over 2 months later, word came through that the German heavy cruiser Lützow had been sighted near Norway, with an escort consisting of 4 destroyers as well as several aircraft. Lützow had originally been called Deutschland, but it's said that Hitler was so scared of the negative consequences for German morale should they lose a ship that bore the country's name that he decided to change it. Having played a key role in Operation Weserübung, Germany's 1940 invasion of Norway and Denmark, the heavy cruiser represented a major threat to the Allies, so they did not hesitate in going after her. On June 12, 1941, 13 Bristol Beauforts from 42nd Squadron set off into the stormy night from RAF Luchar in Fife on the east coast of Scotland. Among their number was young Flight Sergeant Ray Lovett, whose Beaufort was said to be 5 knots slower than the others in the squadron, and assigned the letter W, known as W for wreck. Around midnight, a signal from a Blenheim of 114th Squadron pinpointed the location of the German ships. Nevertheless, most of the Beaufort bombers struggled to find their targets, but not Lovett and W, which had become separated from the main force. Showing impressive bravery and cunning, Lovett took the German cruiser Lützow by surprise. Rather than attacking immediately, Lovett cleverly lingered in the area, mimicking the behavior of a German escort plane. By imitating the recognition signals exchanged between German aircraft and ships, Lovett managed to blend in without arousing suspicion. Seizing the opportune moment, he launched his torpedo at Lützow, striking her port side. The impact caused the cruiser to list heavily and lose all speed. Additionally, the hit triggered Lützow's smokescreen generator, which obscured the target and caused another attacking Beaufort to miss. Even though Lovett's plane was soon shot down, his daring attack significantly damaged Lützow, putting her out of action for 6 months while she underwent repairs. However, subsequent missions would highlight the Beaufort's weaknesses. On February 12, 1942, the German Kriegsmarine conducted Operation Cerberus, which consisted of a channel dash by Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen back to Germany from Brest. 28 Beauforts were sent out to try and stop them, but of these, 13 failed to locate the ships, 3 were shot down, and 1 experienced a malfunction when the moment came to release its torpedo. The remaining 11 did fire their torpedoes, but all missed. Reflecting upon this dismal failure, a further court of inquiry concluded that it was time for a faster, longer-range torpedo bomber to replace the Beaufort. This idea was confirmed by a final British-based Beaufort mission in May 1942, when an attempted attack on Prinz Eugen turned out to be a disaster, with several Beauforts shot down, others forced to jettison their torpedoes, and the rest missing the target. Rather than producing more Beauforts, Bristol instead focused on their heavy fighter version, the Beaufighter, giving it the option to carry torpedoes, and thus serve as a replacement for the Beaufort. Meanwhile, most of the remaining Beauforts were moved to the Mediterranean theater, where they saw some success, most notably participating in the sinking of the Italian ships Victoria and Trento, as well as causing serious damage to German convoys supplying Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps. Likewise, as part of the Royal Australian Air Force, the Beaufort was far more prolific than it had been in Britain. Aviation historian William Green even went so far as to say that the Beaufort's, quote, part in the defeat of the Japanese forces in the Southwest Pacific was probably of greater importance than that of any other single aircraft type. One particularly significant contribution came on January 2, 1944, when Beaufort squadrons dropped over 71,000 pounds of bombs on the Lacournay airfield and other targets around Rabaul, New Britain, causing major damage to Japanese infrastructure and hindering their air operations. After the war, the Beaufort was retired from service by both the RAF and the RAAF. While the Bristol Beaufort was not particularly effective and was often seen as a disappointment due to its engine reliability issues and limited success in some operations, it left a lasting legacy through its versatility and technological advancements, paving the way for the Bristol Beaufighter, which proved to be more effective. Today, Beauforts can be seen at the Royal Air Force Museum, London, as well as several museums and war memorials in Australia.